Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Rebuilding Phase event. I'm so happy that you're here. Today, we're going to be talking about grieving the life that you thought you'd have and how to move forward. Because we know that Saturn return can really almost treat you like a cow in a tornado, right? It just swoops you up and like spins you around. And then you're like, where the hell is my stuff? Where the hell is my house, right? So, today we want to talk to all the people that maybe had something happen during their Saturn return that really threw their life for a loop, and now you have to figure out, who am I and what do I want on the other side of this event? I'm so excited for my guest today. Cori, if you could go ahead and introduce yourself to the people.
Absolutely. I'm so happy to be here, Alyssa. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Cori. I am an evolutionary astrologer. Really excited to be here today talking to you about grief and the relationship with Saturn.
Yes, wonderful. So let's start gently for everyone. When we talk about grieving the life that you thought you'd have, what does that actually look like for someone post Saturn return in their 30s?
Well, grieving the life that you thought that you would have, maybe grieving a partner that you are no longer with, maybe a career path that you spent a lot of your time working toward that just did not work out. Possibly just dealing with just a way that you thought that your life would turn out and just accepting what maybe, potentially the thought of being a parent and, that not working out. There are just several shakeups that can happen there.
Yes, absolutely. And you said a really important word, I feel like, for this topic, acceptance. So I want to dig a little bit deeper into that. I feel like there's a difference between losing someone you love and losing a life that you imagined. So can you walk us through the different types of grief that show up after Saturn return and like the type of acceptance that might be necessary based on that level of grief?
Absolutely. There is a big difference where losing someone that you love may be tied to, the grief of a life that you thought you had. But I think in general, there is a void that is created in your life when you lose someone important to you. On the other hand, when you are just kind of accepting that your life may not be turning out the way that you thought and you're grieving that life, your life kind of becomes a void. And, your plan is not coming to fruition and you maybe don't know what to do. You don't know who you are outside of this person that you thought that you were going to be.
Yeah, yeah. And one of the reasons that you chose this topic, because for those of you who don't know, I allow my speakers, I interview them and I allow them to choose the topic. And Corey chose this topic because it was really near and dear to her heart. She had unfortunately, some experiential knowledge on this topic. So can you tell the people watching about your experience with grief and loss during your Saturn return?
Absolutely. So I have Saturn in Capricorn, and my Saturn return started at some point in 2017. That started with a huge shakeup in my life where I did lose a partner. It was a very sudden death, and that was not something that I had experienced before. So a huge shakeup. And unfortunately, toward the end of the Saturn return in 2019, I did lose my mom. And that was also very unexpected. So a part of my Saturn return theme generally did deal with death and everything that comes with that.
Yeah, yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And so dealing with those deaths, because death is one of those things that it's so final. I think it hurts the most, at least it's final for us, right? We all have our different beliefs about what happens after death, but it feels very final for the people left behind. And so what when you think about that, your partner and your mom, how did that huge level of grief that you went through with them change your relationship to the smaller griefs of maybe, like you mentioned earlier, not having children or not having the job you wanted or whatever smaller griefs you had to let go of on the path to who you are now?
So going through those experiences kind of fast launched me into, my spiritual journey, and just so many questions were raised at that time. Like, what is even death and what happens with that? You have just general understanding, maybe from, your religious experience or, however you have come into that information. But as you mentioned, the actual experiential, kind of knowledge or wisdom, that comes with that forces you to forces you to, take the steps and actually go through that work
Mhm.
and asking those questions, seeking those answers. And for me, you know, it took me on, a whole roller coaster of, kind of studying Hinduism and the idea of reincarnation and just really launching me into the evolutionary astrology path, which does focus on, past lives and the transmigration of souls and seeing astrology as a path in this life. So in that sense, I think the biggest thing, as we mentioned before, is just learning acceptance and understanding, that you may not know the reason behind why these things happen, and not to just kind of like, oh, just general, oh, there's a reason for
Mhm.
everything. It's cool. But on the other side of it, as you mentioned, it makes those small things much more bearable. And you just kind of see them in a different lens, right? Where you see them as, I may not understand why this is happening right now, but I do know that everything is happening for me, not necessarily to me. And when you can, kind of reframe things in those ways and just really understand faith and understand patience
Yeah.
and really not just kind of have those as ideas, but be in the position to actually like practice those things. Those are major tools in this life.
Mhm.
And that has, they've been something that, I've gained a lot through dealing with those experiences.
Yes, absolutely. You said making the small things more bearable, and I lost my father not during my Saturn return, but I was like 21, and it really did show me how strong I actually am, right? It gives you even through all of that pain, like bearing all of that pain shows you a level of strength that you didn't know you had. It almost like unlocks a new level, a new layer.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah, and so you were talking about taking the steps and doing the work, and I think that the grief that you encounter inside your Saturn return when things don't go your way, when you feel disappointed, that really like the Saturn return itself is such a profound threshold for people. But in handling the grief, sometimes it can get tricky. So, what tips do you have for people? Like, how can you tell when you're moving through your grief in a healthy way versus when you're moving through the grief in an unhealthy way or you're stuck in it? What signs should people look for?
Absolutely. I think for a while you can, or at least for me, there, could be some avoidance of, kind of dealing with it and busying yourself and, just trying to maybe bypass some of that work. But what happens during that time is that the grief never goes anywhere. And when for me personally, I realized that I hadn't really grieved properly, especially with my mom, because every time I could not talk about her without crying, right? No one could, I would be fine and no one could, someone could bring up her name and it would just, kind of make me cry. And I realized like, okay, I have some work to do here. And the work, you know, to me did not feel productive. And part of it, it was, just kind of sitting in it and allowing, some of the ugly to come out too,
Mhm,
because associated with grief oftentimes is just profound feelings of guilt, right?
mhm,
And, what could I have done differently? Or maybe if I would have done this, we would have had this experience, or maybe even down to the point where like maybe it wouldn't have happened,
mhm,
if there, was something that I did different, or just kind of allowing all of that to come out,
mhm,
because when we bring it to the light, oftentimes we do get the answers that we need. So I realized like not kind of keeping it hidden and not being maybe just embarrassed by some of the feelings, that I was having,
mhm.
right? And sometimes guilt can come with that, like some shame,
Yeah.
on, your behavior, et cetera. So I think really, sitting with that, really, talking to people, whether it's talking, to a therapist, talking to,
Mhm,
family, people who you trust, and can just maybe hold a little bit of space for you to allow that to come out. And I realized that I was in the right direction when I could, reflect on my mom or reflect on my partner
mhm,
and be, extremely sad, but just understand this is, a part of life. And I'm happy that I experienced them. And I'm happy, that we did have the time together that we did. And it really taught me in a way the, kind of reality of life in form, and that comes with an appreciation for the time that you do have. And I personally feel like I take my relationships less for granted. I try to ask, and I know it's kind of a little bit somber to kind of go about these things, but like if this person were to pass away, tomorrow, or if I were to pass away, like, can I be content,
Mhm.
with how I left this relationship, right? Or, am I content with how I'm, living my life? And so in that way, it just has become something just very helpful. And it's something that, I've embraced.
Yeah, that's so beautiful, so beautiful. And one of the other things, that find that clients are working with or struggling with is, like you said, it's more not necessarily that they lost somebody, that is sometimes the piece, the grief, but a lot of times, especially facing 30, right? There's this almost reality check when you turn 30 of like, okay, like time is moving. Like I am not, I'm not as young as I maybe once was or thought I was or whatever. It's almost like so a lot of 30-year-olds or early 30s can feel like they're running out of time. They can feel like, they're behind on something and that can spark some grief, right? Maybe they're not married, maybe they don't have kids, maybe they're still working a job they feel like is beneath them or is not paying their bills, so they have to work 2 and 3 jobs. So, what would you say about grief that kind of comes in waves like that, right? Like it's like you're doing good, maybe on Friday, Saturday you're doing good because you're hanging out with friends, and then Sunday night the grief comes of like, "Oh my god, I have to do this again, and I hate it," and all the things like it comes in waves like that. Like, how do you work with the unpredictable nature of the grief of how your life is in this moment.
Yeah. So actually, as it relates to that, the one book that was very helpful for me is the Four Agreements, right?
Mhm,
And, the fourth agreement was such a game changer, and it's always do your best, right? And that just seems something like maybe cliche or generic about doing your best, but I realized that how you feel about anything in your life is
mhm,
directly tied toward the effort that you are applying, right? And sometimes something just seems so big, like a huge career move or, saving up for a house or whatever the case may be. But it's like, how do you eat the elephant one bite at a time?
mhm,
And so try not to put, so much pressure on having the big picture, in an instant. But can you figure out a way to make small steps in the direction, right?
mhm,
Figure out that one bite is, and then just continue to take those small bites and understanding that taking those bites is maybe the best that you can do at this time. And when you know that you've done your best, there's a peace that comes with that. And that does settle any type of grief because so much of it, as I mentioned, comes with the guilt of feeling like you're not, doing so much or not doing the best that you can. And so when you realize, even if the best that I can do is a small thing, that brings peace to those situations.
yeah, yeah, that's so powerful to understand that, your best is gonna be different on different days. Like, some days your best is gonna be 15%, some days your best is gonna be 110, and to give yourself that grace, like you said, and don't feel ashamed of where you are because there's so much purpose in where you are. You just have to, when you're focused on getting somewhere else, you're not focused on the beauty and the purpose of where you are, like you said. So, I love that so much. So when we think about, being where we are and being unhappy with that or having grief about it or whatever it may be, maybe they have someone watching has lost someone. How do they know when they're ready to start dreaming new dreams? Like how do they know when they're ready to start moving past what they're upset about in this moment and ready in their body, ready in their spirit to start dreaming up something new. Because I think that the 30s it's so about bringing your imagination to life. Like in your 30s, you kind of start to realize how much power you have over your own reality, right? Like individually, we don't have a ton of power over the reality that we share, but we have so much power over how we experience our personal reality. So, how do they know when they're ready to start dreaming up a new reality? Like, how do you know when to say, "Okay, it's time to let go of this thing that I feel like I've lost or haven't done and move forward?"
Yeah, and that's so interesting and it's so deep. And I can't say that this will be the case for everyone, but being towards the end of my 30s now and reflecting on the grieving the life that I thought, I was supposed to have, etc. Sometimes what happens is you realize this life that you thought you were supposed to have may be a dream that someone else gave you. And I think your purpose and your dream is always within you. And it's the thing that, just kind of stays in the back of your head, it's kind of in your heart, makes you a little scared and, things like that. And I think you never lose that dream, right? And you maybe some of us are a little bit more bold and may have taken big steps toward it in their 20s and, it didn't work out, right? But just to realize like, okay, maybe that particular manifestation of this dream was not necessarily the way that universe intended, but there was, exposure and you can, start again. For the rest of us who may have had, a dream of, like I said, that someone may have given of ways that, our life is supposed to be, et cetera, I think it is reflecting on that little, kind of flicker that just won't go
Yeah.
away, of purpose and passion and allowing yourself to move forward. And I think it's really about giving yourself permission because sometimes that dream just seems like maybe too big for you, or maybe it is, oh, me, like little me. I really do that. So I think it's once you maybe work with these of just in the moment where you are, as long as you still have breath in your body, you can continue
Yeah.
taking that step to just give yourself permission to do a little thing in that direction. So
Yeah, yeah. Just try, that's what I'm hearing. So often we tell ourselves no before we even try. And it's like, don't one of the lessons that came out of my Saturn return was like, don't tell yourself no. Make them tell you no, whoever the proverbial them is. So I want to impart
yeah.
that on anyone that's listening, even if you're hurting, even if you're grieving, like don't tell yourself no, just because you're sad, just because you're feeling intense emotions. And for anyone recognizing themselves in this conversation, if they're stuck in grief, if they feel like a loser, or I've had clients say they feel like a cosmic joke, right? They feel like a big joke. If they feel like that, what's the most important thing that you'd want them to know? Like what do you wish somebody would have said to you in the throes of your grief, in the throes of your Saturn return?
I think that the something, kind of that would have been helpful for me and powerful during that time is one thing that I actually got from A Course in Miracles. And I think the quote is something like, in the context of, divine oneness, right? God is incomplete without you. This universe is incomplete without you. You belong here, right? Without you or without, the manifestation, that you're living, none of the rest of us are complete. And so understanding that you are a puzzle piece and you have to understand that. And so that you can find the pieces that are relying on you, the surrounding pieces, how we start with one piece and
Mhm.
then, oh, that's a cornerstone piece. And then we can, kind of put the picture together a little bit more clearly. And this is the piece that helps. So just having that understanding of there's no mistakes, right? And you being here is not a mistake and you figuring this out. Maybe you don't have the context, in this present life, but to have faith, right? You're here for a reason and give it some time.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that so much, and the idea, I know this hasn't been a very astrology heavy, talk, and my audience knows me for astrology, and so but I feel like grief transcends astrology, all 12 signs, and you find grief in all 12 houses and all 12 signs, like, it's there. It's there for all of us, and so but I do feel like astrology is, as Corey was saying, it's such an important puzzle piece, and it helps to connect so many other ones, and so I think that's why we're both proponents and students and teachers of it. Do you have anything else you want to add before we close, Corey?
I love that you brought us back to the astrology side of things. And I think, as Stephen Forrest always says, astrology doesn't just predict our future, but it can help us understand the questions that are going to be asked of us. And I think seeking the help of an astrologer is really helpful to understand what you're going through in a context, right?
Mhm.
of your curriculum, and that can help you brace a bit, right? And understand, like, it's not just me, it's not just, because at that time when I was kind of going through these things, I didn't see a lot of people around me, kind of going through these things. But as I learned more about astrology over the time, so much of it was kind of evident in, my chart. Even the fact that, my Saturn return was happening in a conjunction with Pluto, right?
Mm.
And that, speaks to some of the grief and some of the transformation and, ego death and rebirth, right? That was the context of that. So, seek the help of astrologers and, give yourself some time.
1000%. Well, thank you so much, Corey. Can you tell the people where they can find you if they want to work with you or follow you on social media?
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me on Instagram. My handle is Free Spirit. That's FRISPIRITT. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And I will see you in the next talk, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.